education sector. Okay, my name is Rasheed Nizam from Malaysia, and I will be your host for this lab. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, this virtual lab convened by Malaysia in partnership with the UNICEF Malaysia over the course of the next 2 days has four key objectives. Number one is amplifying the voice of children and youth as well as of other stakeholders in integrative climate change adaptations, CCA, and disaster risk reductions, DRR policy process through long-term collaborations between stakeholders with Mercy Malaysia and UNICEF Malaysia. Number two is form overall understanding of the country's response to the climate crisis status quo through dialogue mapping in preparing towards the establishment of concrete outcomes at the end of the lab. And the third one is heightened policy and practice action through inclusive transformative CCA and DRR processes to support existing local and regional initiatives. And the last one is establish action plan on the expansion and next course of actions from this event and its partners. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored and grateful to have all of you, not only from Malaysia, and also from Japan and Thailand, along with the various professional and experts background to attend and participate in this lab. For your kind notice, we will be live streaming certain portion of this lab, which include the opening remarks, the keynote address, and setting the stage sessions. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Ahmad Faizal Muhammad Perdaus, President of Mercy Malaysia, to deliver the opening remarks on behalf of Mercy Malaysia. Floor of you, Datuk.
I would like to welcome all of you to this great event that we're having today in partnership with UNICEF. And we're very honored, actually, to partner UNICEF in this, to invite all of you to the Not Risking It Children and Youth in Climate Adaptation, Disaster Risk Reduction in the Education Sector workshop and laboratory. Over the course of the next 2 days, we hope there will be an exchange of diverse viewpoints, knowledge, ideas, and solutions to how the voice of children and youth can be better represented in disaster reduction and climate solutions through the forum of the education sector. Ladies and gentlemen, while the awareness of disasters and climate change among the younger generation of this country is commendable, there is still much work to be done together with the children and youth, both in this country and others, to ensure that children and youth are more resilient and thrive in a constantly evolving world, especially a world that is markedly challenged by climate change. Change is here and is here to stay. Climate change is not a myth. Climate change is proven scientifically, and climate change has got so many factors and variables to it that unless all of humanity come together, we will be at a loss. The issue of whether climate change can be mitigated or not is an issue that concerns everyone, and no more important than children and youth, who are, after all, our future. They represent the future of not just countries, but also humanity as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, Mercy Malaysia has been committed to disaster risk reduction for a long time, ever since the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 and 2005. It's been 15 years now since we've actively promoted, activated, and exchanged and challenged and confronted the issue of disaster risk reduction. However, in the last 7 to 8 years especially, we have come to the conclusion that disaster risk reduction alone will not be adequate. It needs to come together with actions that also confront and challenge the issues surrounding climate change. And therefore, organizations like Mercy Malaysia should also promote climate change adaptation as much as possible. This laboratory, with its many themes, will therefore give the opportunity to all of us to both explore as well as to inculcate both knowledge and share experiences and have solutions and propositions that can look at both climate change and disaster risk reduction in one sphere. We can no longer look at them both separately. Climate change adaptation also requires knowledge and awareness, and not just of experts like most of you here are today, but also of the general community, and also of people who are not as well versed as some of us are. Some people also may have issues with climate change adaptation being promoted in a slightly more difficult way, simply because they have to make a living. These are issues which confront us, ladies and gentlemen. And again, it is no other place where it is more important than in schools and in children. Mercy Malaysia has since 2007 been conducting school preparedness programs, which includes programs like emergency preparedness, hazard mapping, school watching, etc. We are now trying to also amalgamate and incorporate climate change adaptation into our school preparedness program. And we hope, in partnership with UNICEF, there will be many other programs that we can do together. I'd like to take this opportunity for this very strong partnership that today, both in a more general term, but especially in this area of collaboration in climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction in the education sector. We'd also like to welcome the Ministry of Education, with whom we've had a long-standing partnership in our school preparedness program throughout Malaysia. And we welcome the representative today, Dr. Azhar, from the Ministry of Education to our laboratory. We also would like to welcome NADMA, the National Disaster Management Agency, and a special welcome to the Director General of NADMA, Datuk Amin, for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, before I end, it will be wrong for us not to mention the world we live in today. This is a special world that we're living in. There is probably no other because the world was a different world in the first half of the 20th century to what it is today. 100 years ago, when the Spanish flu pandemic hit the earth, the majority of the developing world was still very much underdeveloped. We now have a greater challenge as the COVID-19 pandemic poses not just health challenges, but also economic challenges to all. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic brings its own challenges, and it will be unfair for us to try to address them all today and tomorrow in this laboratory focused on climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction in the education sector, especially with a focus on children and youth. However, we have to take stock of the fact that whatever we plan and discuss today will have to take into account the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic is here and will probably be here to stay for some time yet. We know we are encouraged by the recent news of possible vaccines being made available, but medical and health experts already know that the vaccine alone will not be able to stop the COVID-19 pandemic, not immediately at least. And for countries like Malaysia, it is still some way away before a significant portion of our population will even get the vaccinations. Therefore, whatever we plan and discuss today will have to take COVID-19 as a parameter that fortunately or unfortunately we will have to consider. That should not stop us from the bigger picture of looking at climate change adaptation and how to instill awareness and knowledge in children and youth about it. It is also probably more relevant now than ever. And perhaps with the many health promotion activities that are abound regarding COVID-19, there will be aspects of education and promotion of education and knowledge and awareness on climate change and disaster risk reduction will perhaps be made easier now than before. Ladies and gentlemen, we also have to prepare ourselves, and organizations like Mercy Malaysia, and I do so believe NATMA as well as other organizations like ourselves and UNICEF, we also have to prepare ourselves for the perfect storm. The perfect storm will be a raging pandemic, climate change adaptation and its sequelae, as well as natural disasters, whether or not they are linked to climate change, happening together all at once. And no more is that scenario likely to happen than here in Southeast Asia. We have countries which are affected which are in the Pacific Ring of Fire. We also have countries which are affected by typhoons and cyclones, not to mention the annual floods. Here in Malaysia, preparedness is already underway for the floods as a result of the monsoon that will hit or is hitting the country at the moment. We hope for the best, but we must prepare for the worst. And this monsoon season, in the middle of the pandemic, is a classic example of how preparedness has to come to the fore. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I wish everyone a good and productive laboratory today and tomorrow. And again, we'd like to thank our very strong partner, UNICEF, for all their collaboration and support in making this laboratory happen. We'd also like to thank the Ministry of Education and NATMA for their support and encouragement and participation as well. Thank you and have a good laboratory.
Okay, thank you Yang Berbahagia Datuk Dr. Ahmad Faizal. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, now we are honored to welcome Yang Berbahagia Dr. Rasheed Mustafa Sawar, the UNICEF representative to Malaysia and special representative to Brunei Darussalam, to deliver the opening remarks. The floor is all yours, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Respected Datuk Dr. Ahmad Faizal Perdaus, thank you for your very, very encouraging remarks. Respected Datuk Dr. Aminuddin bin Hasim, Dr. Haji Azhar bin Haji Ahmad, Majar Abdul Rahman bin Abdul Wahab, and of course, respected participants. Selamat datang to all of us. It's a great morning and a great subject to talk about, and it's very great and very significant and symbolic that we are launching from today our 3 days commemoration of World Children's Day globally and in Malaysia. And this is the first event that we are starting with. I'm asking all of us to stay tuned with us and our partners and contribute us for children's agenda in Malaysia. As we all are joining here today, I strongly believe that we passionately and practically care about our climate and our children. And I'm very thrilled to see so many in attendance wanting to reimagine how we respond to disaster risk reduction and climate change. A report from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction shows that 91% of major disaster events are related to extreme weather. And those events can have devastating effects on children, their lives, their families, livelihoods, but importantly, their development of progress made towards their future life. Unfortunately, like many other countries, Malaysia has not been spared the impacts of climate and crisis. Air pollution threatens our outdoors. Illegal dumping of poor waste management, extreme flooding, as Dr. Ahmad mentioned. We have been observing events, disasters in last few years like Hage, uh, resulted in temporary closures of schools, toxic waste in Kim Kim River, and of course the water supplies recently we observed due to the waste management in the rivers. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and participants, fixing environment is not a one-day business, not even 1 year. It takes decades, and we should not really lose opportunity to talk about it, to work. Climate resilience and reduce the risk of our children is very important. UNICEF believes that ways through stronger child-sensitive climate change adaptation, we call it CCA, and disaster risk reduction, especially for children and youth in the country, are very, very important uh, aspects to child development and sustainable development. The CCA and DRR research and policy context in Malaysia has progressed in last decades in areas of national advocacy and policy change, development of tools and guidance, documentation of good practices, which proves the participants of our colleagues from Ministry of Education, NAGMA, and all other involved agencies. Despite the progress, the region still facing many challenges and gaps. This includes the protection of vulnerable groups like children and young people, especially those are very in vulnerable segments like B14, those children, undocumented children that in Sabah, Sarawak, children are in forestry industries and palm oil industry, and also very importantly, Orang Asli children who are very hard to reach communities. So our efforts should not be limited to those children who we can grab nearby. We have to really extend our support, our attention to those who are little far to reach and difficult to reach in politically and in geographically. Malaysia has made tremendous success in many, many areas last decades. But as previous speaker mentioned, that the world is not the world that we have seen a few years ago, and we don't have a proper understanding of the world 2, 3, 4 years from now. We have a tremendous different type of challenges for children and young people. But I'm very optimistic and I'm a strong believer that together we are power and together we can address challenges. And that commitment, we have been having it and we recommit and reimagine that commitment now. UNICEF is committed to protect children from climate change as many other calamities and many other risks globally and in Malaysia. If we have to achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development goals and fulfill child rights under Convention on the Rights of the Child, we need to equip children and families to bounce back from environmental stressors and shocks. I believe it is not late at all, but it's a forward-looking to turn things around. 2020 has been challenging, but also lessons learning for all of us. I hope these next 2 days provide very important lessons learned, very important innovative ideas for us to work in future. Taking this great opportunity, I would like to thank our very, very important and close partner, Mercy Malaysia, and their dedication to work on climate change and also other areas that we work with them. Thank you very much. And I'm also thanking other respected speakers and partners and participants for this event. I wish all the best and good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you to representatives from both organizations for presenting those insightful remarks. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the keynote presentation sessions. Here to present the first keynote address of the day, it is our pleasure to invite Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Aminuddin Hashim, the Director General of the National Disaster Management Agency of Malaysia, NADMA. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum and good morning. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to Mercy Malaysia in partnership with UNICEF for inviting NADMA to be part of this virtual lab. On behalf of NADMA, I would like to also express our appreciation to Mercy, Presidents Yang Bahagia Datuk Dr. Ahmad Faizal, as NADMA's Science and Technology Expert Panel, which is TAP, for his contributions as the lead for Health and Emerging Hazard Cluster and for organizing this lab with various prominent speakers. Next. I will try to comply with the allocated 15 minutes slot and try to focus on addressing the vulnerability and efforts in resilience. Next. Now, let us take a look into the type of disaster that in the slides. While we view this, I would like to also highlight a verse from Al-Quran Surah Ar-Rum, verse 41. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Disaster has spread throughout the land and sea because of what the people have committed. He thus lets them taste the consequences of some of their works that they may return. In this sense, disaster, be it natural disaster or man-induced, more often than not, reflect our own inability and management. Emissions of greenhouse gases and sulfates, aerosols, inappropriate land use policies, deforestations, growing crops on steep, arable lands, building houses, often the homes of very rich or very poor, on vulnerable sites, constructions of earth, destabilizing roads or dams, irrigating in the wrong places, you name it, a lot. And many of the lucrative but ecological, societal and inhuman economic policies and also practices can all be traced back to our own actions. In some, more and more, the seemingly natural disasters themselves are aggravated by the normal workings of the human economy. Globally, there is an increasing trend on the disaster events, the number of the affected people and the financial damages and losses. The Emergency Event Database, EMDAT, reveals that in the last decades, on annual average, there are about 348 natural disasters occurred, affecting more than 200 million people and recorded more than 166 US billions worth of damages. In 2018 alone, Asia regions has recorded the highest numbers of disaster occurrences at 141 compared to the rest of the world. In the last 2 decades, 1998 to 2018, Malaysia has experienced around 51 natural disaster events, with flood as the major frequency. Over 3 million people were affected, nearly 8 billion ringgit in damages were also recorded. Out of that, the flood alone have caused 148 deaths and affecting more than 500,000 people with almost 5.82 billion worth of losses. Malaysia is susceptible to hazards including floodings, landslides, droughts, and forest fire. In addition to, Malaysia has also have highest percentage, around 67% of the population exposed to floods among ASEAN member states between 2012 until 2019. From this slide, we can see that the tabulation of disaster impact in Malaysia from the past 2014 until 2019, despite only impacting less than 2% of our population, Malaysian population, the damages incurred were far exceeding the community ability to recover from it effectively. 2014, the flood recorded around 500,000 victims with 2.58 billion ringgit of losses. These losses are 0.85% of national GDP. 2020 is a far more challenging year, as everyone noticed and also mentions. Globally, almost 50 million cases of COVID-19 and more than 1.2 million people have lost their life. This pandemic has taken a toll in ways that no one can ever measure. It disrupts every aspect of people's lives in an unprecedented that no one can make in every manner. It affects all the society in distinct ways. We are now facing gradual transitions of government responses from disaster to immediate crisis management to the implementation of recovery measures with several concerns such as increasing levels of unemployment and also the implication of rising debt as well as threats to our well-being. Next. How then the government manage disaster? Our main reference that uniting various agencies and synchronizing all the efforts is the National Security Council's Directive 20, or better known as MKN 20. These directives specify that fulfilling the disaster criteria, disaster constitutes a serious disruptions of functioning of a community or even national affairs involving widespread of human, material, economic or environmental losses and impacts which exceeds the ability of the community to cope using our own resources and require extensive mobilizations of resources throughout the nations. Next. This directive provides policy and mechanisms on disaster management on land holistically covering various stages of pre, during or even post-disaster. Next. It specifies the roles and the responsibilities of various government agencies, statutory bodies, and also private sectors and voluntary bodies like Mercy Malaysia in disaster management. All the initiative existence, all the programs will be synced so that immediate response and measure could rightfully address the disaster and criteria and crisis. Now let us focus our attention on the vulnerability. Citing some of the lessons learned from the history, I would like to share Malaysia's experience in undertaking these challenges. Who are the most vulnerable groups when facing the disasters? And what type of vulnerability that they are exposed to and how best we can deal with this? The common vulnerable groups are basically youth, children, women, elderly people, senior citizens, disabled, and people with special needs. The common cause would be their economic status as well as their level of awareness, perceptions, attitude, experience, and length of residence and also social relations. Next. They face physical, economic, social, and emotional vulnerability and requires extensive resource and assistance to recover from their post-disaster loss. For instance, the tsunami 24 recorded more than 5,000 people lost their houses. Flood in year 2014 recorded 2.85 billion of damages, while COVID-19 loss is unprecedented and still going on. And we are still facing the heat. Addressing the disasters for the vulnerable group is a lifelong journey, and it does not begin only during the aftermath of the disaster. Malaysia builds its nation and resilience during the early day. New economic policy, which we call NEP, developed was centered on the philosophy of growth with equity to support and strengthen the government's effort to drive the economy towards promoting quality and inclusive growth to ensure that no one in the society will left out in the development process. This target was developed long before SDG, with their integral component of reducing inequalities and ensuring no one left behind. Poverty eradications remain as an integral component and thrust of the subsequent development policies, namely our National Development Policy (NDP) and the National Vision Policy, and also our 5-year Malaysia plans. Under the present 11 Malaysia plans, Malaysia continues to focus on the effort to address multi-dimensional and relative poverty issues by reducing inequality and improve income disparity, as well as narrowing the development gaps to overcome regional disparities, as well as providing greater access to quality opportunities to enhance capacity and capability of the bottom 40% of our households, which actually include people like women, children, youth, senior citizens, and people with disability, for them to face greater challenges of modern urban life through a more integrated and comprehensive social protection system. This is our antidote to rectify economic status issues as the common cause of vulnerability. As a result of continuous government efforts supported with resilience and sustainable economic growth, hardcore and extreme poverty amongst the ethnic group based on national poverty line measures have been basically virtually eliminated, with the overall incidence of hardcore poverty reduced significantly. Next slide. This is some of the approach that we do. For instance, in resilience buildings, what we need to do, like introduce a more sustainable and resilient environments for local community. Then we develop national and local DRR policy, guidelines, and SOP for us basically to know what to do, when to do this, and facing all the challenges, to increase public awareness and participations, to enhance community-based disaster risk management, to establish DRR knowledge and in our education curriculum, and basically to appoint DRR champion in each community so that they know what to do and become basically the agents of change. Next. We also focus on building a more resilient community through a more systematic bottom-up engagement. Then the Sendai framework for the DRR framework priorities for actions and target directly relate to the rights of well-being of the children and youth and principles of do no harms. There are various government initiatives, next, and interventions have been made to foster stronger and better community resilience, to anticipate risks, to limit impact, and to bounce back rapidly through survival, adaptability, emergency aids, restorations, and also reconstruction phase towards capacity building to build back better post-disaster. Next. We cannot do this alone. We have to communicate, we have to involve everyone around us. Various initiatives and programs throughout various government agencies, statutory bodies, NGOs, private sectors are an integral part in building this resilience. NAMA, in collaborations with states and district authorities, as well as other strategic partners in private and public society, civil society, domain has carried out various initiatives and programs targeting the community as a whole that include the children and other vulnerable groups. We have disbursed more than 200 million ringgit for disaster cash aid since 2015, with more than 2,500 houses for relocation of disaster victims. We allocated more than 30 million ringgit just to face the COVID-19 to date. Stuff like food aid, PPE, and what's not, disbursed more than 8 million ringgit as COVID-19 loss of income assistance, developed tools to enhance community resilience, including integrated food hazard map and early warning system, introduce a sustainable and resilient environment for the local community to develop national and local DRR policies, guidelines and SOP, and so on. We will continuously enhance the community resilience and engaging our youth and children, especially them, by incorporating the Sendai framework for the RR. CBDRM, simulations, outreach programs are among our continuous efforts in addressing the vulnerable groups, enhance their resilience. Some of the achievement in 2019 and 2020 has basically been shown in the previous slides. So what next? To face that perfect storm with the monsoon seasons coming, COVID-19 and everything, there are many areas of opportunities that we can collaborate. From the stage of mitigations, at the stage of planning, response and recovery, we need to engage everyone. I'm a strong believer of bottom-up approach, so we need to get the community participated in most of our program. It's now more than ever we need to work as a team. We need to come together as never before to ensure that we can bounce back and no one left behind. This is our shared responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you Yang Berbahagia Datuk Dr. Aminuddin. Okay, our next esteemed speaker is the Director of Education Planning and Research Division from the Ministry of Education Malaysia. Please welcome Yang Berbahagia Dr. Haji Azhar Haji Ahmad to deliver the keynote address. The floor is all yours, Doctor.
Malaysia, Dr. Rasheed Mustafa Sarwar, UNICEF representative from Malaysia, Yang Berbahagia Dr. Aminuddin Hashim, Director General NADMA Malaysia, Deputy Head Can you hear me? Nashrik, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we can hear you, Doctor.
Sorry for the interruption. On behalf of Datuk Dr. Habibah Abdul Rahim, our Director General Ministry of Education, Malaysia, I would like to convey her warmest regards and sincere apology for not being able to be part of this significant engagement with such a distinguished group of people who are present here today to discuss on pertinent topics of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Today's theme, Not Risking It, Children and Youth in Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction in the Education Sector, is timely. Climate change is more severe at the greatest grassroots levels community in the form of natural disasters such as droughts, floods, and typhoons, which affect the lives and livelihoods of people, especially for our children, because education is the first thing that is interrupted whenever such calamities occur. It is without doubt that climate change impacted the most vulnerable, although they are among the least responsible. They are likely to suffer most from climate change adverse effects, which is in many ways are contributed by our unsustainable lifestyles. Although global narratives are currently focused on COVID-19, climate change is undoubtedly one of the major challenges in our modern times. Climate change is a problem that requires immediate attention, and since for the most part it is human in origin, it is only fair that we humans take the necessary actions to find a workable solution for the problem we have created, because climate education is the key to ensure that current and future generations are better equipped to address the problem of climate change and to ensure peace and harmony within the region, because one of the root cause of conflict and crisis is the impact of climate change, droughts, flooding, depleting natural resources, and global warming. While it is true that children and youth are victims of climate change and its consequences, perhaps we need to step up efforts to equip them with the knowledge and necessary skills to create awareness about our changing environment and to build resilience to future environmental challenges through education. With education, we can change the roles of children and youth from victims to advocates of climate change, risk communicators, and behavioral change agents in their respective communities. Ladies and gentlemen, adapting climate change and reducing disaster risk will require action at all levels of society, including individuals, organizations, local and national governments, and international bodies. Education is key in our efforts to adapt and mitigate climate change and to prevent new and reducing existing disaster risks, which will contribute to strengthening communities' resilience. In our quest for access, equality, and quality education, we need to ensure that implementations and strategies towards climate change adaptations are risk-informed. This would mean that education today needs to provide opportunities to empower our children to make decisions to address climate change and live sustainably. Central to climate change adaptation is to equip students with the knowledge, skills, and values to cope with climate change, understand the risks of climate hazards, to ensure safe, inclusive, and eco-friendly environment, a vital element for sustainable development. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia has long recognized the importance of sustainable developments as a prerequisite to fulfill development demands and at the same time sustain the environment. In Malaysia, climate change adaptation has always been featured prominently as one of the key elements in the national education system to infuse positive awareness, values, and attitudes at a very young age for sustainable development and growth. Climate change adaptation is not taught as a subject, but aspect of global sustainability and awareness on environmental issues form part of the 6 key elements of the standard-based curriculum framework in Malaysia. Adapting climate change elements into the curricula without compromising an already overstretched program of study is a challenge. The recommendation, therefore, is to embed elements of climate change in an interdisciplinary manner into existing subject areas such as science, social studies, and language courses. Elements of climate change like protection of the environment, global warming and greenhouse effect, sustainable consumption and production are already incorporated across the curriculum that aim to raise awareness and develop positive attitudes for a sustainable tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge of climate change is unique within the physical science itself. Scientific evidence is clear. The Earth is getting warmer. The significant time lags in the climate system poses a unique challenge. Many of the changes that are happening now are unprecedented over decades or millennia. Furthermore, impacts such as sea level rise and the melting of ice blocks can take several centuries or even millennia to be fully expressed. Hence, climate change adaptation has to start early because learning from experience is learning too late. The delay between decisions that cause climate change and their full societal impact can range from decades to millennia. As a result, learning from education rather than experience is necessary to avoid those impacts. Pedagogical literature in the field of climate change and sustainable development suggests that education practices that engage heart, head, hand, rather than merely focusing on head, are more effective and useful in achieving change in behavior and attitude to address the reality of climate change and unsustainability. Therefore, we need to diversify our pedagogical approaches in the classroom, perhaps by emphasizing on inquiry-based learning as one way to enable learners to personally experience impact of climate change, which is often perceived as an abstract and distant phenomenon because the effects do not immediately manifest themselves in their own environment. Understanding the impact of greenhouse gases emissions, as well as developing the strategies for mitigation, fighting against the causes, and adaptation, coping with the effects, requires scientific knowledge and critical thinking across disciplines. Hence, promoting inquiry-based learning is critical to ensure impactful climate change education, especially in the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM education. As inquiry-based learning forms an integral part of STEM education, Malaysia has taken steps to strengthen STEM education by placing more emphasis on practical applications through laboratory, project-based, and hands-on activities. This form of learning will allow students to develop their interdisciplinary skills and make linkages of the social dynamics of climate change, its impacts on society, and finding solutions to manage and reduce disaster risks in the future. Malaysia believes that these efforts in strengthening STEM education will provide an excellent basis for schools to address issues on climate change. This is because inquiry-based learning takes students through a process of reflection, scaffolded discussions, creating opportunities for students to share with others and explore solutions or actions. This process of learning is an important part of supporting students to feel empowered, to be change makers, and taking action is often a crucial part of an inquiry cycle. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it cannot be denied that the role of teachers comes second to none in the promotion of inquiry-based learning for better delivery of climate change adaptation. The most significant conclusion is that teachers must be educated, trained, and supported in order for climate change adaptation to be taught in an active and participative manner, and to allow students to make informed decisions on risk and management. Neither can we deny that implementation of climate change elements is an ongoing challenge for MOE. And with the present pandemic COVID-19 crisis, integrating climate change elements will be even more difficult. Countries all over the world, Malaysia included, are trying to mitigate learning loss of children as a result of school closure. However, this should not be done at the expense of climate change adaptation. The COVID-19 crisis has exposed the vulnerabilities of our health and social systems, but most importantly, it has highlighted to us the need for better disaster preparation to ensure a more resilient society which is better prepared to withstand future pandemics and other major looming threats to humanity. As Bill Gates said, as awful as this pandemic is, climate change could be worse, but there are lessons from the current crisis that should guide our response to the next one. Hence, we need to take this opportunity to collectively find strategies to accelerate partnership for a more comprehensive response to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. This would require us to strategically link climate change adaptation and disaster risk holistically through curricular integration and co-curricular activities. I wish all of you a rewarding two-day engagement to discuss future implementation strategies that will deliver the expected outputs pertaining to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction in the education sector. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you Yang Berbahagia Dr. Haji Azhar. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special colleague from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction Regional, UNDRR Office for Asia and Pacific, who will deliver the third and final keynote address. Please welcome Mr. Animesh Kumar. The floor is all yours, sir.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. Datuk Dr. Aminuddin bin Hashim, Director General of NADMA, and Dr. Azhar Ahmad, Director of Education Planning and Research, Ministry of Education, Dr. Rasheed Mustafa, Representative of UNICEF, and Datuk Dr. Ahmad Faizal, President of Mercy Malaysia, educationists, academics, and representatives of different international and civil society organizations. Again, a very good morning from Bangkok. I'm pleased to be speaking in this virtual lab. UNDRR, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, serves as the focal point for disaster risk reduction in the UN system, and also the custodian of the Sendai framework. In my presentation today, I would try to seek the importance and how it's being done, the coherence of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, and try to locate the role of youth and children in that. Let me try to scroll. So let me start by making a case for a disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Is my screen seen by everyone?
Yes. Please continue.
Thanks a lot. 5 years ago, a series of major global frameworks were launched as part of the post-2015 agenda. In particular, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the Paris Climate Agreement. Collectively, they aim to create a more prosperous and safer world, and none of them can be achieved without the other two. The world, after all, needs to be safe from disasters to develop sustainably, and climate change is the single largest driver of disaster risks. However, though the three frameworks are interdependent, their implementation, unfortunately, has often been seen to be fragmented. We see this fragmentation in the siloed approaches countries have adopted to implement each framework, where each has a ministerial or agency lead with little coordination among the lead agencies. While this approach makes tasking and reporting requirements easier within a single entity, it hinders the effectiveness of policies and programs on the ground. A series of drivers of risk, as can be seen on the slide, work in unison to create development challenges, including in the form of increased frequency and magnitude of disasters. The risk drivers include, for example, climate change, poverty and inequality, environmental degradation, and so on. And that is why it's very critical that countries adopt a coherent approach in the implementation of these frameworks, where climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction are integrated at all levels of development planning. In an ideal world, we would want to see development and risk racing against each other. However, this often does not happen, and we see poor development processes creating new risks for the future. This makes development process and risk racing in the same direction, and over time, as we have seen in many countries, risk overtakes development. This shifts the discourse from risk to development to risk of development. And this is the new paradigm in disaster risk management, which hence locates sustainable development at the core of its implementation. It ensures that development embeds risk in its very DNA, hence accounting for risk while being implemented and not creating new ones. Truly, development that does not take risk into account cannot be sustainable. The new paradigm of integrated disaster risk reduction and adaptation also hinges on an inclusive approach to its implementation. If we are honest about this transformation, we need to transition from government to governance that requires moving from engaging with stakeholders as secondary actors to empowering them as primary ones. And this includes children and youth. Not only because they stand to lose the most by the rising cost of disasters and the growing impact of climate change and other hazards, but also because they can be part of the solution. After all, they have already demonstrated to the world their commitment to climate action through their activism. And last year's wave of climate protests was the most visceral display of that. And somebody switch off their motorbike, please. I was recently speaking at the launch of the Guardians of the Planet and was amazed to see the views of nearly 10,000 children, and not surprising, the majority of them picked climate crisis as their first concern, followed by access to work and education. It's very clear that few issues have galvanized the youth of this generation as much as the climate crisis. The question for us and those in government is how we can harness this energy and the creativity of youth to help address the vulnerabilities and build the resilience of communities. Having outlined the importance of climate and disaster risk as an issue and their coherent management a development imperative, I would outline 4 areas that children and youth can contribute to. The first one is the technology. We need creativity of children and youth and digital nativism because it's clear that as disaster risks become more complex, technological solutions need to be created to enable governments and communities to make the best decisions with the data they have. And as mobile and data technologies become cheaper and more accessible, this opens the possibility of innovative applications that can be scalable even in the context of developing countries. Related to this is the area of data. This is key to understanding risk and planning against it. This is especially important if we want to identify and address underlying vulnerabilities that make certain groups and communities more susceptible to being disproportionately harmed by disasters. This includes demographic data that is importantly disaggregated by sex, age, and disability. Thirdly, is the area around innovation. And this goes beyond technological innovation to social innovations as well. For example, for effective education continuity, innovations are also required on policy and institutional front. Innovations also mean leveraging community, family, and peer-to-peer learning. And finally, everything gets defeated if we cannot communicate clearly what we want to achieve. This leaves a gap between knowledge and behavior, and communication is an effective bridge that fills this gap and paves the path for a behavioral change. On this slide, you will also see some good examples of what we are doing to implement some of these ideas together with several partners, many of who are behind this lab. The young scientists and professionals play a huge role in this process. I would in particular like to highlight the role being played by the UNICEF network, including in Malaysia, some of who are attending this lab, who are a group of vibrant and enthusiastic young people doing some extraordinary work in multiple countries. We are very happy to have been supporting them since their conceptualization in partnership with UNESCO. These are just some of the ways children and youth can help Malaysia and the region accelerate progress in reducing climate and disaster risks in a way that can impact change on the ground. I must commend the government of Malaysia, in particular NADMA, for strongly advocating for a science-based approach to disaster risk reduction in the country. Last month, the government hosted the Regional Asia-Pacific Science and Technology Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction together with us and UKM University, which was another example of their leadership. Many of these good practices have emerged as very relevant in context of the ongoing global crisis, as have been pointed out by all the previous speakers. The COVID-19 crisis, with its multifaceted impacts into all walks of life, is a very clear example of why countries must move from managing risks through a siloed government approach to an inclusive governance approach, where all key sectors and actors can participate. And at this point, I must highlight the comprehensive school safety framework, which is now more relevant than ever. The framework follows an all-hazards approach with multi-hazard risk assessment to inform education sector policies and plans. In particular, I would like to highlight the third pillar of the framework that highlights the importance of integrating risk reduction and resilience into education. As was pointed out earlier by Dr. Azhar, school curricula have limited exposure to adaptation education, and hence coherent climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction is a key element that needs to be strengthened in this pillar. And COVID also offers a key opportunity for green growth. In context of COVID, Build Back Better principles should also be better integrated into the education sector, and safe back to school should be promoted in the recovery stage. From our side, UNDRR remains very committed to promoting the coherence of disaster risk reduction and adaptation, including in the education sector. These are some of the tools that you're seeing we have launched recently on school safety, but we are also implementing a very big global program on coherence and developing a guideline to promote coherence between disaster risk reduction and adaptation planning. We also have been and will continue to collaborate with the Asia-Pacific Coalition for School Safety and the ASEAN Safe Schools Initiative to further strengthen the comprehensive school safety framework. In the end, whether it is through consultations, competitions, and conferences, countries and organizations must do more to ensure the voices and skills of children and youth are integrated into climate and disaster risk reduction policymaking. That is because climate-related disasters are increasing and their impacts are growing. And as COVID-19 demonstrated, other hazards are lurking that could trigger the next mega disaster. A whole-of-society approach demands that we include those with the largest stake in the future of our planet in our deliberations and that we harness their abilities. I'm sure that we will see these discussions being followed and replicated at the regional level, including through the next Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, being hosted by the Australian government next year, and the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, being hosted by the Government of Indonesia in 2022. With these words, I thank you all for your attention and look forward to a very productive discussion forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Animesh Kumar. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Mr. Muhammad Hafiz Muhammad Amirul, representing Mercy Malaysia, to deliver the Setting the Stage presentation.
Thank you, Nashrik. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, dearest colleagues, friends, partners, and lab participants. So please allow me to share a little bit of perspective to help us to set the stage on the focus of the discussion on this lab, not risking it, children and youth in climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction in the education sector. As we all have heard or have read before, or have listened from the presentation from the previous speakers, that the increasing frequency and severity of hazards observed within this region testifies that this global predicament and Malaysia has not been spared from the impacts of the climate crisis, which further exacerbate threats from the COVID-19 pandemic and many other interlinked risks and hazards. So to get that context clear, let me share some facts from the global context so that we can take this down to the national context for the benefit of our discussion today. Nearly 160 million children live in areas of high or extremely high drought severity. I'm not sure what it looks like in Putrajaya or in Bangkok or in Tokyo, but from my place today, if you look out at the window, it's quite hazy, and I'm sure that this is part and parcel of the changing climate or whatever that human beings are doing right now. Over 500 million of children live in extremely high flood occurrence zones, and this is particularly very relevant to Malaysia because one of our biggest nuisance year after year is basically flood. But that does not mean that we are not exposed to other risks as well. Extreme heat will become a growing and a regular problem in many parts of the world. Public education on how to manage it will be vital. So yes, I would like to echo the presentation from the Ministry of Education and also from Dr. Animesh that the education sector should seriously look into not only exploring but advocating these particular areas of study for students and children, and not only focusing on the one-sided conventional education system that we have experienced for the past few decades. Household air pollution leads to 4.3 million deaths annually, and 13% of these are deaths of children under 5. So it is as high as numbers of deaths that were caused by war and crisis. The rising global temperatures have made many regions suitable for transmission of malaria, and obviously we can see this happening again in Malaysia. Malaria and other kind of health risks has been successfully reduced, but now we can see and we can witness the rising number again. And one of the world's leading killers, malaria, one of the world's leading killers of children under the age of 5. Conditions that increase suitability for dengue fever are likely to intensify due to the climate change. So this clearly link climate change to health threats and other threats, especially to children. So from those global contexts, with formulated a few issue statements which are relevant, but of course need to be further explored by the participants of this lab. So issue statement number 1, climate change will fundamentally alter Earth's climate system in many ways that threaten children's physical and mental well-being. Number 2, today's children and future generations will bear a disproportionate share of the burden of climate change, which will affect child well-being through many direct, indirect, and societal pathways. And issue statement number 3, the uncertainties associated with climate change and its mitigation, coupled with the fact that the cost of climate change mitigation policies need to be paid now upfront, but the benefit can only be harvest in the future, something that is very not tangible at the moment, make this effort very difficult in enacting appropriate policies. But having said that, there are calculations, there are tangible calculations saying that when we invest in children, we invest in the future. Investing in a child's health, development, and the environment bring benefits throughout life and across generations. This is very obvious. And if you don't believe this, which I'm sure all of the lab participants do believe it, but for some people out there, UNICEF, WHO, and the Lancet has produced a remarkable report named A Future for the World's Children. And in one of the report section, there's a benefit cost ratio study to justify that on the returns on every dollar invested on children, so there's a clear benefit. Okay, and within those hypotheses of investing for children's future through real climate action and stronger disaster risk reduction action and governance, the action is now, and that's the purpose of this lab. We really hope that this lab will not end up as another discussion platform, another webinar that will produce wonderful reports, but fail to push forward meaningful action. So that is the real hope of this lab. But again, just to align everyone's focus on the lab. So our action, at least for today and tomorrow, is to help advocate for stronger climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction efforts, especially for children and youth in the country, and to support and help intensify actions on CCA and DRR in the education sector towards Malaysia's own strategic action plan for transformative CCA and DRR. And this action is very crucial because we don't want to risk it. We don't want to risk their future because their future matters. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nasrid.
Thank you, Mr. Hafiz. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our first thematic session for the day, entitled Exploring Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation Measures Through a Child-Centric Approach. Before we continue our sessions, can we get all of you to fill up this introductory poll? The link is posted in the chat box. Okay, while all of you fill up the introductory poll, this session will be exploring and analyzing the current DRR and CCA landscape through the context of children and youth. We have two special speakers today whom will be presenting both the national and regional perspective of this thematic session. Before we start, let me remind you, if anyone has any questions for our esteemed speakers, please feel free to post them in the question and answer box Q&A, and then maybe our speakers can answer right after all the speakers finish their presentations. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, please welcome Ms. Yeon Mi Choi, Advisor at the UNICEF East Asia and Pacific Regional Office. Take it away, Ms. Hyun.
Good morning, everyone. This is Sunmi, Regional Climate Change and Environment Advisor for UNICEF East Asia and